By 6:30 on a wet April morning, the parking lot at Millie's Cafe in Sullivan County already looked like a machinery ad. New diesel pickups lined in chrome, polished wheels still clean enough to mirror the sky. Then Brittany Sutton pulled in behind them in a faded green 1997 Dodge Ram with a cracked taillight, one mirror held on by black tape, and 312,004 miles glowing soft orange on the dash. The truck gave a shudder when she shut it off, like it was tired of proving itself. She stepped out in sun-bleached overalls stitched at both knees, feed store gloves with the fingertips darned in blue thread, and a barn coat that had seen enough winters to earn a pension. Inside, heads turned the way they always did, brief, dismissive, amused. Someone at the counter muttered, "The peasant made it," and a few men laughed into their coffee. It was half joke, half title by now. Brittany nodded to Millie, ordered oatmeal and black coffee, and sat near the window with a weathered notebook open to columns of numbers. While men around her talked about yield contests and new monitors that could map to half-inch accuracy, she penciled in fuel burn from yesterday's tillage pass, 1.7 gallons per acre. At another table, Devin Caldwell, pressed jacket, clean boots, watch that cost more than Brittany's truck, was saying he'd just signed on a precision package that ran $214,000, all in, installed, and that if you're not scaling now, you're already behind. People looked between them like they were watching the old county and the new county share a room. What they saw, mostly, was appearance. What they missed was structure. Brittany owned 640 acres outright, rented 320 when contracts held, and ran 180 head of cattle with rotation charts taped inside her mudroom. Her farmhouse still heated with a wood stove because propane had gone feral 2 winters in a row, and she preferred certainty. She patched her own gloves, bought mineral and feed in off-season lots, and repaired equipment on concrete she'd poured herself. To neighbors, it read as scarcity. To Brittany, it was operating margin. She measured every decision after interest, after depreciation, after taxes, not at coffee shop volume. She didn't post first calf photos online, didn't finance side-by-sides, and didn't call gross revenue profit. That alone made her strange. The rule that made her strange had started with a bad summer and a yellow legal pad. She was 24 when her father died in a hayfield rollover outside Green City, and 25 when the final medical bills and estate paperwork taught her what debt really meant. The farm had looked substantial from the road, land, iron, cattle, grain bins, but the books told another story. Her father had rolled operating notes through 3 rough years, then borrowed against machinery to cover fertilizer, then refinanced when prices dipped. Nothing scandalous by local standards, nothing extravagant. Just one thin season after another, stacked on variable rates. When he was gone, the assets stayed. So did the payments. Brittany sat with her mother at a folding table and opened statements until midnight, adding interest lines with a calculator that clicked like an insect. In one binder, she found 6 separate loans on depreciating equipment, all with terms longer than the useful life of what they financed. On paper, they owned a lot. In practice, the bank owned the timing. A retired loan officer named Earl Pritchard helped her untangle it. Earl had been the kind of banker who wore seed corn caps instead of suits and could recite land descriptions from memory. He looked over the stack once, then wrote one sentence at the top of her yellow pad. "Never borrow long for something that dies young." Under it, he listed exceptions: land, tile, permanent improvements if cash flow could carry bad years. Everything else, he told her, should be bought late, used, repaired, or not at all. Interest is rent on impatience, he said. Pay it if you must. Don't volunteer. Brittany copied that sentence into every ledger she kept after that. The first 5 years were not romantic. She sold 80 acres to stabilize the note on the rest, which locals read as failure. She liquidated a line of purebred calves her dad had prized because commercial cross calves turned cash faster. She took winter shifts at a feed mill 45 minutes away, stacking sacks and logging deliveries to keep operating capital off revolving credit. She lived on less than $40,000 a year and once spent a February wrapping pipe insulation from salvage foam because new sleeves were for people with margin. When friends took lake weekends, she rebuilt a leaking hydraulic cylinder at midnight with a manual printed from an online forum. By year 7, she had rebuilt enough credibility to buy back 40 acres from a cousin who needed liquidity. She paid cash. Not because she had plenty, because she had waited. That became her pattern. Accumulate, wait, strike only when price and utility matched. She tracked cost per acre on legal pads first, then a spreadsheet she taught herself to build at the library in Milan. Fuel, labor hours, wear parts, custom hire, hauling, shrink, basis, insurance, taxes. No category got a free pass because that's just farming. If she could move a line by $2 an acre across 900 to 1,000 acres, she moved it. If she couldn't, she left it alone. At 31, she made what people called a backward decision, and Earl called survival. She stopped trading machinery on dealer cycles. She bought a 12-year-old combine at auction for $118,000 cash when neighbors were signing notes north of $400,000. It needed auger work, feeder house chains, and an electrical harness that made grown men swear. She and a mechanic friend rebuilt it over 3 off-seasons for about $38,000 total. That machine harvested 11 crops and still sold for $64,000. She ran the math every year. Equivalent annual ownership cost stayed far below financed new alternatives, especially once interest and insurance were included. When she turned 43, someone at the co-op joked that she looked poorer than she had at 25. In a way, he was right. The coat was older. The truck was older. Her kitchen cabinet still had 1980s brass pulls. She never replaced because doors close fine. But by then, she had 19 years of records behind one stubborn principle. Her accountant later estimated the avoided interest from not financing rapidly depreciating assets was roughly $1.3 million over that period. Not earned in one dramatic windfall, saved in dull, repetitive refusals. Refusals had a rhythm. In November, when others were tired and done thinking, Brittany pre-bought bulk fertilizer from a distributor clearing warehouse contracts before year-end. She paid by check and saved enough to average about $31 per acre on key nutrients versus spring pricing. She scheduled field work to reduce deadhead miles and fuel burn, negotiated livestock mineral in annual lots instead of emergency pallets, and bought feed when basis and trucking aligned, not when bins looked low and nerves ran high. Across one recent season, those choices shaved about $72 per acre in all-in cost. On 1,000 acres, that was not a detail. It was a strategy. At Yarrow auction the next March, the strategy looked like boredom to everyone else. Dealers and growers crowded around a nearly new 16-row planter package, listed with integrated precision upgrade, and financing flyers clipped to the catalog. Bidding jumped fast. Brittany stood 3 rows back, hands in coat pockets, silent. What she wanted was Lot 47, a retired planter transmission, from a salvage consignment, and a box of ROW unit parts no one glamorous would fight over. She won the transmission for $3,100 and the parts lot for $1,850. Over 2 weekends, she and her hired man tore down her existing unit, replaced bearings and seals, recalibrated drive components, and had the planter running true for about $6,400 all in. The dealer quote she'd gotten for replacing the system outright was $86,000. At church potluck that Sunday, someone asked why she was afraid of technology. Brittany took a bite of casserole, swallowed, and said, "I'm afraid of unnecessary payments." Then she passed the bowl and changed the subject to rainfall. Her simplicity wasn't theatrical, it was logistical. She wore patched overalls because they still worked. She kept the old Dodge because it hauled feed and started in January. She burned wood because she cut it herself and knew exactly what each winter would cost. The style came from function, and the function fed the books. Then Devin Caldwell came home from Columbia with a finance degree, bright branding ideas, and lenders who liked his last name. People had called him the Prince since high school, partly because he wore cologne to basketball practice, mostly because his father, Russell Caldwell, owned the county grain elevator and a seed franchise with enough market share to decide who got called back first in spring. Devin leaned into the nickname like a campaign slogan. He wore quarter zips with his own logo stitched over the chest, hosted winter meetings with catered brisket, and talked about modernizing the county with scale, software, and aggressive land capture. At first, Brittany dismissed him as noise. Then he started making offers, cash rent offers. He went to landowners with contracts coming due and bid $410 per acre, nearly $95 above what local margins could sustain without very strong price years. He said old models were dead, that speed was safety, that fixed cost diluted its scale. He promised soil mapping, variable rate magic, and professionalized management. He posted drone footage of fields with music and text overlays about growth curves. Landowners who'd never had multiple bids suddenly had 2, then 3. Devin always bid last and highest. At Millie's, he said it loud enough for 3 tables to hear. "Some folks are still farming like it's 1984, he laughed, glancing straight at Brittany's coat sleeve where the elbow had been patched in brown canvas. "You can't thrift your way into the future." The room gave him the polite laugh people give power. Brittany stirred her coffee once. "Future still has math," she said. By July, 2 of her rented tracts were gone. One landlord apologized and said Devin's offer would pay a grandkid's tuition. Another said he liked Brittany but couldn't leave that much money on the table. Suppliers who'd always split allocation by history and reliability began prioritizing Caldwell orders because he pre-booked huge volumes on borrowed lines and signed flashy annual contracts. At one counter, Brittany got told seed delivery would slip 10 days because Caldwell Farms moved up priority. For the first time in years, the threat on her farm wasn't weather, pests, or export headlines. It was a neighbor willing to weaponize debt and social pressure to buy speed. That night, she sat at her kitchen table under the yellow light, ledger open, wood stove ticking in the corner as it cooled. She rewrote acreage plans with the lost tracks removed, recalculated labor windows, and made 3 quiet decisions. No bidding war at irrational rents, no panic purchases, no borrowed bravado. If this was going to be a contest, she'd run it on the only clock she trusted. Time, not applause. Time, not applause. By 8 the next morning, Brittany was in the machine shed with a tape measure, a grease gun, and a yellow marker, walking the toolbar and writing replacement dates directly on hoses so no one had to guess mid-season. Her hired man, Levi, watched her tag a hydraulic line with June Max and asked, "Careful, you gonna go after any of that ground back?" "Not at 410, she said. "Not to lose money faster." He nodded like he agreed, but his face said what everyone else in the county was thinking. If acreage was status, standing still looked like losing. Brittany didn't argue. She handed him the marker and had him label the rest. At noon, she drove to Milan and met her accountant, Dana Ruiz, in a narrow office above the pharmacy where the stairs creaked like old barn boards. Dana already had Brittany's files open in 2 stacks, handwritten ledgers to the left, digital printouts to the right. Brittany set down a thermos and said, "I need the long view, year by year. No stories, just math." Dana smiled. "That's your favorite kind." They started at year 1 after the estate cleanup, when Brittany was still covering winter shifts at the feed mill and counting bolts before buying them. Net farm income that year was just over $62,000 on paper, but after debt service, taxes, and repairs, free cash flow was under $9,000. Year 2, better yields, worse diesel, and almost no gain. Year 3, she sold underperforming calves, cut machinery custom hire, and pushed free cash flow to $27,000. Dana slid the page over and tapped a line item. "This is where your life bends," she said. The line was tiny. Interest paid, down 18%. Not dramatic, not Instagram-worthy. But it was the first year Brittany paid cash for every single wear part and operating input after harvest, instead of carrying balances into spring. From there, the pages became a pattern. Year 4, she bought a used grain trailer for $14,200 cash and cut outside hauling bills enough to recover the cost in 3 seasons. Year 5, she prepaid insurance in 1 check and saved 4.5%. Then put that savings into tile on 40 acres with chronic drown-out patches. Year 6, she bought a salvage welder for $2,300 and stopped waiting 2 days for custom repair calls during planting windows. Year 7, she bought back 40 acres from her cousin, cash, no note, and moved from vulnerable renter to durable owner by 1 field at a time. Dana read numbers. Brittany remembered weather. The dry June where the corn rolled by noon, and everyone blamed hybrid choice, though it was really root depth and residue management. The autumn where mud took 3 extra gallons per acre, and she changed her whole harvest traffic pattern the next year. The spring she skipped a must-have software subscription, used notebook maps instead, and redirected the money into bin fan upgrades that cut spoilage. That year alone, shrink dropped enough to add nearly $19 per acre to realized grain value. By year 10, living expenses were still below $45,000. Not because Brittany enjoyed going without, but because she refused to let household drift steal operating flexibility. She fixed her own porch roof. She kept 1 health plan, 1 truck, 1 vacation weekend every other year at most. Her peers called it austere. Dana called it liquidity. Year 11 through 14 were what Dana labeled quiet compounding. Brittany's gross revenue bounced with commodity prices like everyone else's, but her costs didn't lurch. She replaced an engine on a used tractor for $11,600 instead of rolling into a $190,000 upgrade package. She bought herbicide in disciplined windows, not fear windows. She switched 1 cattle mineral supplier after checking actual intake rates, shaving cents per head that became thousands by winter. Nothing looked big alone. Together they became a shield. Dana pulled out a single-page summary and read it aloud as if she were reading a weather report. Over 19 years. Avoided interest from deferred equipment financing, approximately $1.3 million. Average annual retained earnings reinvested $91,000. Debt service ratio never above 1.18 after year 8. Cash reserve target met in 14 of 19 years. Brittany exhaled through her nose. So if we lose acres? We rework labor and input volumes. Margin still positive if yields are normal and you don't chase rent. If yields aren't normal? Dana turned the page. Then everybody bleeds. You just bleed slower. That afternoon, Brittany sat down with her own planning sheet and did what looked like retreat, but was actually design. She trimmed corn acres where distance inflated fuel and shifted those fields to soy rotation with lower pass counts. She penciled in a smaller hired harvest crew and moved Levi's hours to preventative shop work in February and March. She cut one discretionary fertilizer pass on fields with strong carryover levels and booked a November purchase slot with a supplier in Chillicothe, willing to honor cash terms. Every cut had a reason. Every reason had a number. When people say discipline compounds, they usually imagine a graph. On a farm, it sounds like old bearings pressed out before they fail, like fuel receipts sorted on Sunday nights, like saying no in a room where everyone claps for yes. By late summer, the county had picked sides without admitting it had done so. Caldwell had become movement. New hats, new logos, drone videos over emerald strips, a branded tent at the fair with touchscreen monitors showing variable rate maps in glossy colors. There was intelligence there, and effort, and some methods that worked. Devin wasn't stupid. He was aggressive in a way that fit the era. Velocity first, correction later. And many neighbors followed him for understandable reasons. Mark and Elise Reddick, 2 miles west of Winnigan, had farmed conservatively for years, but watched rent bids climb beyond their existing footprint. Their son wanted to come back from Kansas State. Expansion looked like the only doorway large enough for another family paycheck, so they signed 3 new leases at $385 to $405, financed a newer combine, and locked in expectations around high commodity prices. They weren't greedy. They were trying to make room for the next generation before inflation made room impossible. Tom Voss, who still brought donuts to volunteer fire meetings, rolled machinery on dealer cycles every 3 years because downtime had nearly ruined him during one wet harvest a decade earlier. He told Brittany once, "I don't buy shine, I buy sleep." For a while, he was right. New equipment reduced breakdown risk and let him cover acres fast. But his cost structure assumed high utilization and stable rates. When either moved, his cushion evaporated. Even the Danners, careful people, ledger people, took a variable operating line larger than usual after fertilizer prices spiked and suppliers demanded early commitments. They expected 1 season of pain, then normalization. Instead, they got freight volatility, basis swings, and 2 weather misses in a row. At Millie's, the coffee talk simplified all of this into personality. Bold versus cautious. Modern versus old school. Winners versus worriers. Reality was harsher and less flattering. Everyone was trying to survive a cost structure that had changed faster than local habits. Brittany watched it happen with sympathy and a little dread. She saw Tom's daughter run books at night after coaching volleyball because payments no longer fit one set of hands. She saw Mark's son drive truck in the off-season and still come up short on health insurance. She saw good operators pulled into thin margins by expensive land and expensive money at the same time. No one needed a lecture from the peasant. They needed better timing than the market was offering. Then timing turned against almost everyone at once. The first punch came from rates. What had started as cheap variable debt reset again and again as SOFR climbed, and monthly interest expenses that once looked manageable became a second payroll. Operators carrying large floating notes got letters with polite language and brutal implications, increased collateral requirements, tighter covenant reporting, reduced flexibility on renewals. The second punch came from weather whiplash. One year it was dry enough in June to stunt root development on lighter soils. The next, spring rains parked over northwest Missouri and turned low fields into ponds. Stand counts dropped hardest on newly leased ground with poor drainage history. The exact acres high bids had captured because they were available, not because they were resilient. The third punch came from price. Corn slipped to $4.12. Soybean basis widened at local delivery points, chewing through what futures charts had promised. Input costs came down slower than grain prices, because they always do on the way down. The spread was the killer. Caldwell's acres looked enormous from the road, but inside the spreadsheet, red ink spread fast. With about 2,600 acres under management and rates resetting north of 9% on major variable notes, his interest burn hovered around $46,500 a month. His projections, built on stronger corn assumptions and cleaner field conditions, flipped hard when wet spring losses hit his newest leases. Suppliers who had once courted his volume began asking for tighter payment terms. One September afternoon, Brittany stood at the edge of a field near Pollock with Levi and watched Devon's crew replant a drowned-out section in a rushed window that should have been side dressing somewhere else. She didn't feel triumph. She felt the ugly recognition of a machine over-revving. Casualties started showing up in notices, then in conversations spoken softer than usual. The Reddicks liquidated their newer grain cart and one tractor to satisfy covenant pressure after 2 weak margin years and a rate reset that added nearly $11,000 monthly to servicing costs. They kept land, lost flexibility, and postponed their son's return indefinitely. Tom Voss entered a restructuring agreement through his lender and sold half his cattle herd to reduce feed risk. He still worked every acre he could, but his equipment rotation plan was gone. He'd be running the current line until parts or luck ran out. The Danners took a bridge note at punitive terms to cover input invoices when post-harvest cash sales underperformed projections. They were not reckless. They were trapped by sequence, and Devon, still sharp, still public-facing, began missing local events he once headlined. Rumors said one of his operating renewals came with emergency conditions and additional guarantor requirements. At Millie's, nobody said it outright, but everyone watched his table when he walked in. Brittany's own year was not easy. She lost yield on 2 wet corners, spent more on fungicide than she wanted, and had nights where she stared at the ceiling listening to rain and recalculating break-even in her head. But no banker called to reprice her machinery debt because she had none. No supplier froze her account over variable rate exposure because she paid cash on schedule. Her only long-term note, land debt fixed at 3.1%, sat quiet and predictable, about as exciting as a fence post, which was exactly how she liked it. In November, while others sold grain under pressure to meet month-end obligations, she sold in tranches she had pre-planned, then bought next season's fuel and a portion of seed at distressed discounts from distributors hungry for immediate payment. The same downturn that cornered leveraged operators offered cash buyers terms that hadn't existed in years. She took them, unemotional. One evening, Dana came by the farmhouse with updated statements, and they sat at the kitchen table while oak logs settled in the stove. Dana ran a finger down the page. "Your gross is down," she said. I can read, Brittany replied. Dana kept going. Net operating margin is still positive. Debt-to-asset ratio stable. Liquidity ratio up because you didn't chase acres. Brittany looked out the window where the old Dodge sat under a bare sycamore, paint gone chalky at the hood. People still think I'm behind. Dana gave a small laugh. Behind what? Their monthly interest? A week later, Brittany stopped at Millie's before dawn. The same chrome trucks were out front, though fewer were freshly washed now. Inside, voices were lower, less certain. Markets had humbled the room. When Devon walked in, he looked tired in a way expensive jackets couldn't hide. He ordered coffee, nodded to two tables, and sat alone with his phone face down. For a second, Brittany considered crossing over, saying something kind, something neutral, farmer to farmer. Then Millie refilled her cup and asked if she wanted pie to go, and the moment passed. Brittany paid cash, tucked receipts into her coat pocket, and stepped into the cold. The county still called her the Peasant. Maybe they always would. She climbed into the old Dodge, turned the key on the second try, and drove toward a season that was getting crueler by the month. Exactly the kind of season where patience stopped looking old and started looking expensive. The next morning, with the caution from November's talk at Millie's still hanging over the county, Brittany pulled out before daylight and pointed the Dodge toward Highway 5. The room's new silence had followed her home, and now it rode with her. Time, not applause. The cold stayed in the cab until Brittany hit Highway 5, then the old heater finally coughed warm air across the windshield. Halfway to Green City, her phone buzzed in the cup holder. Dana. You driving? Dana asked. Yes? Keep both hands where they belong, then listen. Caldwell's primary lender called a landlord capacity meeting at the courthouse annex at 10. They're reviewing who can carry acres if leases get reassigned mid-cycle. Brittany kept her eyes on the road. And two of your former landlords asked if you'd attend. They want options. Devon's counsel requested formal financial statements from any operator who wants in. Brittany gave a short breath that might have been a laugh. So now numbers matter. They always did, Dana said. Bring your 2024 statement packet. I'll meet you there. By 10:15, the annex room was standing room only. Landowners in chore coats, two attorneys, one farm credit officer, one regional bank rep, and a row of operators pretending they were there, just to listen. Devon sat up front in a navy quarter zip with his logo on the chest, jaw set hard enough to show through stubble. He did not look at Brittany when she came in. The meeting started with legal language. Continuity of operations, assignment risk, collateral protection, agronomic stewardship. Then it got simple. If acreage moved, landlords wanted tenants who could cash flow through bad prices and worse weather without collapsing halfway through a lease. One by one, operators gave short capacity summaries. Most were verbal. Some waved incomplete printouts. A few declined specifics and said their bankers could vouch privately. Then attorney Melinda Krause, representing two trusts with 600 acres at issue, said, Ms. Sutton, since your name appears on both alternate proposals, would you submit your full statement for the record? Brittany slid a stapled packet down the table to Melinda and the two lenders. Dana, seated against the side wall, already had matching copies. The room went quiet in that particular rural way where nobody turns their head, but everyone listens harder. Melinda read aloud because transparency had been requested by the trusts. Current assets, $1,942,000. Non-current assets, $6,110,000. Total assets, $8,052,000. She turned the page. Total liabilities, $312,000. Fixed rate land note at 3.1%. Net worth $7,740,000. No one moved for 2 full seconds. Then somebody in back whispered, not quietly enough. That can't be right. Dana answered from the wall without standing. It's reviewed, reconciled, and tied to tax filings and depreciation schedules. You're welcome to examine line support. The bank rep, a man who'd spent most of the morning avoiding eye contact, cleared his throat and asked Brittany, debt to asset? 3.9%, she said. Liquidity coverage if corn stays sub 450? Operating and living fully covered 30 months at current structure, without asset sale. The farm credit officer leaned forward. Any contingent guarantees? None. Devin finally turned then, looked straight at her, and for the first time since he'd come home from Columbia, he didn't have a quick sentence ready. His expression wasn't anger exactly. It was recalculation. One landlord, Harold Vane, 72 and stubborn, removed his glasses and said what half the county was thinking. You mean to tell me you've been driving that same broke-down Dodge around with near $8 million in net worth? Brittany met his eyes. Truck still runs. A few people laughed, but it landed different this time. Less mockery, more embarrassment at prior assumptions. Melinda kept reading details into the record. No machinery lines, no revolving consumer debt, no callable side obligations, current ratio strong, historical profitability positive through price contractions. She paused on one line. Average personal living expense over 20 years, $47,800 annually. A younger operator in the back gave a low whistle. Another muttered, "She didn't thrift because she was broke." Dana corrected him gently. She thrifted because she was building options. When the meeting adjourned, nobody called Brittany the Peasant. They called her ma'am, or just nodded and made room at the doorway. Outside, wind pushed dust along the curb. Devin came down the steps 2 at a time and stopped beside her truck. You could have said something, he said, voice flat. About what? That you were sitting on that kind of balance sheet. Brittany opened the door. Would it have changed your rent bids? He had no answer for that either. 3 days later, Mark Reddick knocked on Brittany's mudroom door after dark, hat in both hands, son Colt standing half a step behind him. Mark got straight to it. Colt's got 80 acres lined up from my brother-in-law and 40 from Elise's aunt. Good ground. He can run our older planter and 1 tractor. Bank denied his operating line unless we cross-collateralize the house. He swallowed. I can't do that to Elise again. Colt looked at the floorboards. I only need inputs and fuel. I can work nights at the coop. Brittany looked from father to son, then at the raincoat dripping onto her mat. Come in. Take your boots off. Over coffee at the kitchen table, she asked for field histories, yield records, soil tests, and a realistic cash flow. Not optimism, math. Colt had brought all 4 in a folder with color tabs. Brittany respected that. How much? She asked. $52,000 gets me seed, base FERT, chem, fuel, and insurance deductible cushion. Not machinery? No, ma'am. Good. By the time they left, Brittany hadn't promised anything. She had, however, asked Dana to come Saturday. Saturday became 10 chairs in Brittany's machine shed, a propane heater, and 5 beginning operators who'd been shut out or squeezed by high-rate credit. Colt Reddick, 120 acres row crop startup. Jenna Voss, 80 leased acres plus 35 head retained, trying to keep cattle and crop cash flow from cannibalizing each other. Caleb Danner, returning home on 140 acres after the family's bridge note scare. Amy Kirk, former agronomy tech leasing 60 acres, first generation, no collateral history. Nate and Owen Bishop, brothers farming 110 acres, custom on handshake arrangements, chronically undercapitalized. Dinah stood by a whiteboard and wrote one title in block letters: Sullivan Revolving Input Fund, $250,000, 0% interest. Then she wrote terms beneath it. 1. Money can be used only for seed, fertilizer, crop protection, fuel, and crop insurance premiums. 2. No machinery purchases, no household spending. 3. Repayment due by January 15th after harvest. 4. Required record-keeping monthly, reviewed by Dana. 5. Participation requires soil health benchmarks, cover crop on vulnerable acres, erosion control compliance, and residue retention targets. Jenna squinted at the board. Why soil rules if this is input money? Brittany answered. Because I'm not funding short-term yield at long-term land loss. If the ground erodes, everyone's poorer. Amy raised a hand like she was still in extension class. What if weather wipes us out? Then we renegotiate principal timing, Brittany said. No penalties if records are honest and agronomy is sound. But nobody disappears. Caleb asked the question no one wanted to ask. Why do this at all? Brittany leaned back against the workbench. Because the system right now charges beginners double, high rent and high interest. That kills good operators before they get one full cycle. I can't fix markets. I can remove one pressure. By evening, amounts were set and documented. Colt, $52,000. Jenna, $38,500. Caleb, $61,000. Amy, $27,500. Bishop Brothers, $71,000. Total, $250,000 wired from Brittany's operating reserves Monday morning. But she wasn't finished. 2 weeks later, she called Harold Vane and another elderly landowner whose leases had turned into annual bidding contests. Together, they controlled 160 acres of rolling ground with erosion scars that showed up every hard rain. I'll take a 5-year lease, Brittany told them, at lower rent than you're getting offered. Then I'll sublease to 2 beginning operators under performance terms. Harold barked a laugh. Lower rent than market? Why would I do that? Because market bids are stripping topsoil and burning out tenants. I'm offering certainty, $235 per acre, paid on time, plus soil metrics improved year over year. They argued for an hour. They settled at $240 per acre, still roughly $95 under hot bid levels. Brittany assigned 80 acres to Colt and 80 to Jenna under identical subleases pegged to conservation benchmarks. If they hit benchmarks, rent stayed flat for 3 years. If they mined the soil, they lost renewal rights. Outcomes showed up fast, not in miracle yields, but in avoided failure. Colt bought inputs on time and planted in window instead of piecing seed together lot by lot. His projected cost of credit at local operating rates, 10.25% for roughly 9 months, would have been about $3,998. He kept that cash in his operation. Jenna avoided liquidating another tranche of cattle to finance crop inputs, preserving herd structure she'd spent 6 years building. On her $38,500 advance, interest avoided was about $2,960, and more importantly, she stopped cannibalizing productive assets to feed the note cycle. Caleb used his $61,000 allocation to lock fertilizer early and avoid punitive in-season pricing. Savings from timing plus avoided interest were projected near $8,400 combined. Amy, with the smallest line, finally got treated by suppliers as a real account because payment was immediate. She secured better chemical terms and launched her first season without maxed personal cards. Avoided interest in card fees, roughly $2,700. The Bishop brothers used $71,000 to quit emergency fuel buys and late fee seed orders. They also paid crop insurance up front instead of monthly financing. Estimated avoided carrying cost, $5,300. Across one cycle, the no-interest structure was set to save this tiny group around $22,000 in financing cost alone, before yield, before price, before any luck at all. At Millie's, people called it charity at first. Brittany corrected that when it got back to her. Not charity, she told Dana. Infrastructure. In December, Dana and Brittany sat again at the kitchen table, but this time the paperwork was stacked in 3 piles: Brittany's own 20-year books, the new fund ledger, and preliminary repayment schedules from the 5 participants. Dana tapped Brittany's historical summary. You know folks think this money appeared from one big land sale. Brittany snorted. Would have been easier. Dana turned the pages and read out loud, half to Brittany, half to the numbers. Year 1 after estate unwind, net worth roughly $386,000. Interest expense $97,000. Year 5, net worth $1.12 million. Interest down to $54,000. Year 10, net worth $2.96 million. Interest $21,000. Year 15, net worth $5.41 million. Interest $13,400. Current, net worth $7.74 million. Annual interest under $10,000. She flipped to an analysis sheet she'd built for skeptics. If you had financed machinery on the county's average replacement cycle, roughly every 5 to 7 years, your modeled additional interest paid over 19 years is $1.3 million. That number, people like to repeat, it's conservative. Brittany watched stove light flicker against the window glass. Dana continued. Your operating discipline savings average around $72 per acre on an average controlled footprint of just under 1,000 acres through those years. That's about $1.3 million gross operating advantage. Even if we haircut for bad years and execution misses, you still retain a massive structural edge. She slid the 3rd page over. Now the fund. First cycle principal out, $250,000. Expected full repayment by January 15, $244,300 with one weather-affected partial extension of $5,700 for Amy, already documented. Effective capital preservation, 97.7% in year 1. Financing costs prevented for participants, approximately $22,000. Soil benchmark compliance after first checks, 4 fully on track, 1 conditional with remediation plan. Brittany studied the figures a long minute. So patients paid twice, Dana nodded. First to build your balance sheet, then again when you deployed it. They added one more calculation because Dana insisted on showing the whole picture. Brittany's below-market lease structure, about a $95 per acre concession on 160 acres, represented roughly $15,200 per year of direct opportunity cost Brittany was choosing to absorb so new operators could survive without predatory rent pressure. Over 5 years, if maintained, that was $76,000 transferred from her possible income into someone else's runway, not counting interest-free capital. That, Dana said, tapping the page, is what people miss when they call you cheap. Cheap hordes. You built optionality, then shared it with terms that protect the land. Wind rattled the mudroom door. Brittany stood, fed another split log into the stove, and came back with 2 mugs of reheated coffee. "You think it holds?" she asked. "The model?" Dana said. "Yes, if you stay strict." "No," Brittany said. "The county." Dana glanced toward the dark window where distant lights from neighboring farms flickered between bare tree branches. "Depends what comes first," she said. "Ego or arithmetic?" As if on cue, Brittany's phone lit on the table with a county alert from the legal notices list she followed out of habit. Court-supervised equipment and lease auction, Caldwell Agri Holdings, date posted. Brittany read it once, then turned the screen toward Dana. Neither woman spoke for several seconds. Then Brittany folded the notice into her ledger, right behind the fund disbursement sheets, and said, "All right. Let's decide what actually pencils." "All right. And let's decide what actually pencils." Dana pulled a legal pad from her bag and drew 2 columns on Brittany's table. Need and want. "Read the notice again," she said. Brittany did. "Equipment and lease rights, court supervision, staggered lots, certified funds required." Dana tapped the table. "You are not going there to win a story. You are going there to buy cash flow." Brittany nodded. "Need adjoining ground if price stays inside 10-year return. Dryer if discount is real. Maybe 1-grain trailer if cheap." "Want?" Brittany looked toward the window where the old Dodge sat under frost. "Everything's shiny." Dana smiled once. "Then write it down so you can ignore it in public." By midnight, they had the numbers tight. The 420 acres adjoining Brittany's North Block mattered because it removed 2 deadhead roads, fixed drainage routing, and turned 3 awkward field triangles into 1 clean pass pattern. Dana ran the estimate twice. About $61 per acre in long-run operating advantage before yield improvements. At 420 acres. That was enough to justify a hard bid cap that still kept Brittany's leverage sane. The next morning, they met at the bank in Milan. No fanfare. No announcement. Brittany signed for a cashier's check at $3.57 million, drawn from reserves and maturing notes she'd laddered for years, in case panic prices ever came to town. The branch manager slid the check across like it might ignite. "You sure?" he asked quietly. Brittany tucked it into a document sleeve. "I've been sure since 2009. Just took this long for the chance." The auction grounds at the county fair lot smelled like diesel, wet gravel, and coffee gone bitter on hot plates. Men stood with folded sale bills, collars up against wind. Deputies by the gate checked bidder numbers against registration. A court clerk sat under a pop-up tent with a laptop and a stamp. Devin Caldwell was near the front rail, hands in his jacket pockets, listening to the auctioneer's cadence without hearing it. His quarter-zip logo looked faded at the shoulder. The first machinery lots moved fast and foolish, exactly what Dana expected. A near-new tracked tractor ran past Brittany's cap in under 2 minutes. A sprayer package drew dealer money from 3 counties. People bought fear and hope in equal measure. Brittany didn't lift her card. Levi stood beside her, whispering lot numbers. "That one? No. Trailer? Too high?" By noon, the crowd had thinned from spectacle to serious money. The auctioneer called the Dryer lot, Caldwell's nearly new unit, installed 2 seasons ago, still carrying factory stickers under dust. "Who's got 250? The auctioneer barked. A hand went up, another, then silence at $180,000. Brittany raised her card. 188. A dealer hesitated, looked at his phone, and shook his head. "Sold. 188 to bidder 214. Levi let out a breath he'd been holding. "Half price." "Less," Brittany said. "If it works." The land track came at 3:30. Everyone came back for that. Lot description crackled through the speaker. 420 contiguous acres, mixed class 2 and 3 soils, drainage easement to existing district line, subject to court confirmation. Bidding opened aggressive and stayed there. 2 investment groups pushed it past what most local operators could touch. A neighboring family partnership jumped in late. Brittany stayed still until the number crossed into the range she'd planned. Then she raised her card once. 3,520,000, the partnership countered. 3,540,000. Brittany. 3,550,000. The investment rep took a call, frowned, then nodded to his broker. 3,560,000. Dana, 2 rows back, didn't move. Brittany could feel her own pulse in her throat. She heard Earl Pritchard's old sentence as clearly as if he were standing beside her. Pay it if you must. Don't volunteer. 3,570,000, Brittany said. The partnership folded. The investment rep stared at his screen, thumb hovering, then lowered his hand. 3,570,000 once. Twice. Sold. Bidder 214 pending court confirmation. No cheering. Just a rustle through the crowd, a change in weather. At settlement tent, Brittany handed over the cashier's check and signed without flourish. Devon stood 10 feet away with his attorney, looking at the same forms from the opposite side of fortune. When she stepped back into the wind, he spoke without looking at her. You weighed me out? Brittany zipped her coat. No, I waited math out. He gave a tired laugh with no humor in it. Same thing, I guess. She considered saying something kind, then chose plain truth instead. You were never wrong about technology, Devon. You were wrong about timing. He nodded once, jaw tight, and turned back toward his lawyer. January 15th came in sleet. By 7:30, Brittany's machine shed lights were on. Dana had a folding table, receipt books, and a coffee urn that hissed steam into the cold air. The 5 fund borrowers came in stamped with weather, mud on cuffs, red ears, damp hats. Name, amount, documentation, Dana said, businesslike. Colt went first. He laid down a cashier's check for $52,000 and a binder so neat Brittany raised an eyebrow. Field maps, invoices, sales slips, soil tests before and after. Your uncle offered me another 40, Colt said, trying not to sound proud. I told him I'd only take it if we can keep residue standards. Mark, standing behind him, looked 10 years lighter. Jenna stepped up with $38,500 in 2 checks and a grin that only showed when she forgot to hide it. Didn't liquidate 1 cow, she said. Not one. Tom Voss, her dad, waited by the heater pretending to inspect a sprocket display. His eyes were wet anyway. Caleb brought $61,000 and asked if he could reserve spring planning time with Dana because his family wanted to stop using short bridge notes as normal. Dana pointed him to Tuesday at 9. Nate and Owen Bishop came together, check for $71,000, and a stack of fuel purchase logs color-coded by date. Owen tapped the pages. Bulk timing saved us more than the zero interest did. Amy came last, cheeks pink from cold, and set down $21,800 with an insurance letter clipped on top for the remaining $5,700 extension from hail damage. I hate being the one with an extension, she said. Dana shook her head. You documented immediately, agronomy stayed compliant, and you called before payment date. That's not failure. That's governance. Amy let out a breath and nodded. When the paperwork was done, Brittany poured coffee into paper cups and stood in front of the group. Fund turns tomorrow, she said. Same rules. No machinery. No household bleed. No disappearing. 2 additions this year. Peer review and contribution. Colt frowned. Contribution? 0.5% of what you borrow, Brittany said. Goes into a weather loss reserve for the next person. You needed runway. Somebody behind you does too. No one argued. By spring, the multiplier had started showing up in places balance sheets usually miss. At the co-op, Amy now paid in one shot and got quoted like an established account. The manager stopped explaining basics to her and started asking her opinion on fungicide timing. She hired a high school FFA student Saturdays to scout emergence and taught her to read leaf stage instead of app alerts. The Bishop brothers organized 3 neighbors into a shared prepay fuel drop so nobody was buying panic diesel at planning weak spikes. One older farmer who'd mocked them for spreadsheet farming asked to join by June. Jenna, still on her 80-acre sublease, hit soil benchmarks early and used the stable rent to keep feed planning straight. She ended summer with her cow-calf numbers intact and enough confidence to sign a 3-year vet contract that cut emergency call costs. She started mentoring Amy on livestock crop cash flow because she'd learned the expensive way where those systems steal from each other. Colt planted cover on vulnerable slopes even when rain made it miserable, then stood with Harold Vane in a September storm and watched the water soak instead of streak brown downhill. Harold nudged him with an elbow. Didn't think I'd live to see a kid my grandson's age teach me infiltration. Colt grinned. You taught me rent clauses first. Caleb persuaded his family to split personal and farm accounts completely, then sat at Dana's office with his mother and father and closed their bridge note line for good. His dad looked at the final paperwork like it might bite. So we just don't reopen it, he asked. Dana slid the pen over. That's the whole trick. Devon's resolution arrived in public, not rumor. At the circuit court confirmation hearing, every bench was full. The judge approved liquidation terms for Caldwell Ag Holdings, major equipment sold, high-rent leases terminated or reassigned, short-term storage debt settled at negotiated discount. Remaining obligations folded into a structured 5-year workout tied to personal guarantees and asset sales. Russell Caldwell sold controlling interest in the elevator franchise to stabilize family exposure. The Caldwell name stayed on a sign for a while, then didn't. When the clerk read the final order, Devon stood, shoulders squared, and answered each question clearly. No spin left to sell. Outside the courthouse, he found Brittany by the steps. I took a position with a grain risk firm in St. Joseph, he said. Salary. No leverage. Mostly basis and hedge work for people who don't want to learn it the hard way. Brittany nodded. You'll be good at that. He gave a small, almost embarrassed smile. I still think scale matters. It does, she said. After survivability. He looked down at her mud-streaked boots, then at his own polished ones, dulled by courthouse slush. For what it's worth, you were right. Brittany shook her head. No, the note terms were right. The Prince nickname hung around town for a month, then disappeared because there was no kingdom left for it. 3 years later, the roll call fit inside Millie's cafe on a Thursday morning, though barely. The chrome trucks were still in the lot, but now they parked beside older rigs without comment. Brittany's 1997 Dodge sat near the side door, odometer at 403,118, tail light still cracked, mirror still taped. Inside, Millie rang mugs onto saucers and shouted, "If you want a table, you share." At the long table by the window sat nearly everyone who'd been part of the storm. Brittany Sutton, now farming the original ground plus the 420-acre tract, with the bought-at-auction dryer running every fall and cutting her drying cost exactly as projected. Dana Ruiz, still above the pharmacy, now with 2 junior accountants because every young operator wanted bookkeeping like Sutton's. Levi, promoted from hired man to operations partner, on performance pay, sleeves rolled, still labeling hydraulic hoses with yellow marker dates. Colt Reddick, farming 240 acres, married, baby girl at home, repayment record spotless. Mark and Elise Reddick, no longer cross-collateralizing their house, finally sleeping through the night in April. Jenna Voss, running her acres and herd with hard discipline, now co-teaching a winter workshop on mixed enterprise cash flow, with Tom in the back row pretending not to be proud. Tom Voss, still driving older equipment now by choice, not force, because he restructured and stayed in the game. Caleb Danner, back full-time, family bridge note line permanently closed, his mother in charge of separate household books like a general. Amy Kirk, up to 140 leased acres. First generation, but no longer first-year fragile. Mentoring 2 teenage girls from FFA on agronomy internships. Nate and Owen Bishop, operating 190 acres and a small side business, coordinating group fuel and input timing for neighbors at cost. Harold Vane, older, grumpier, unexpectedly evangelical about soil tests. Melinda Krause, who now wrote lease clauses with soil benchmarks because landowners kept asking for the Sutton language. Earl Pritchard, retired and thinner, cane hooked over his chair, grin unchanged. Even Devin Caldwell showed up when he was in town, carrying a laptop instead of a bid sheet. He'd become useful in a quieter way, teaching hedge discipline at extension nights, warning rookies exactly how variable rates bite when markets turn. People listened because he spoke from scar tissue. Millie set down Brittany's oatmeal and black coffee without asking. "Still this?" she said. "Still this," Brittany answered. Dana dropped a folder onto the table. "Since we're all pretending this is casual, here are year-end numbers." Groans, then laughter. Brittany opened the folder anyway. Final line. Assets, $8.41 million. Liabilities, $338,000. Net worth, $8.07 million. Debt to asset, under 6%. No one clapped. They didn't need to. The numbers were no longer a secret and no longer the point. After breakfast, they drove to Brittany's North Tract for a field walk. Wind moved the cover crop in dull green waves. Boots sank just enough to prove the soil held structure. At the edge of a drainage outlet, Colt knelt and dug with his fingers. "Root channels are deeper than year one." Harold snorted. "I can see that without kneeling, son." Amy laughed. "He kneels so he can post it with captions." "Don't start," Colt said, grinning. Near the machine shed, the auction dryer hummed steady. Levi slapped its side like greeting an old dog. "Best ugly purchase we ever made." Inside the shed, above a workbench scarred by decades, Brittany had framed a yellow legal pad page. The ink had faded, but the sentence was clear. Never borrow long for something that dies young. Below it, in newer marker, interest is rent on impatience. Pay it if you must. Don't volunteer. Earl stood under the frame and tapped his cane once against concrete. "You copied my handwriting wrong," he said. Brittany smirked. "You wrote like a doctor." True enough. He looked around at the room, the younger operators, the ledgers, the parts bins labeled and relabeled, the quiet hum of a farm, not pretending to be anything except solvent. And his voice softened. "Didn't think folks would listen," he said. "They listened when it hurt enough," Brittany replied. By dusk, everyone had gone except Dana and Brittany. They sat on the tailgate of the old Dodge with thermoses between them while cattle moved dark against the far fence line. "Ever gonna buy a new truck?" Dana asked. Brittany looked at the Dodge, paint gone almost matte from years of sun. When this one dies. Dana raised an eyebrow. And if it doesn't, then I guess we both keep looking poor. They laughed into the wind. The county still had hard years. Markets still swung. Rain still missed and then arrived all at once. But there were fewer emergency notes now, fewer April panics, fewer leases won at numbers that guaranteed regret. The revolving fund kept turning. One season's borrowers became the next season's mentors. Soil stayed on hills where it belonged. Young operators stayed long enough to become middle-aged operators with paid-for mistakes instead of fatal ones. At sunrise the next morning, Brittany drove past the shiny dealership billboard outside town, the one promising upgrade now/pay later in letters 10 feet tall. She didn't slow down. The Dodge rattled, heater squealed, and the odometer clicked one more mile. She turned onto gravel, toward fields she could afford to farm, through good years and bad, toward a dryer bought at half price, toward land stitched into cleaner shapes by patience and a cashier's check, toward a shed where other people's futures now penciled on the same table that once held only hers. The prince had tried to outrun time and borrowed too much of it. The peasant kept time, paid cash when it mattered, and turned waiting into a harvest large enough to share. By the time the sun cleared the sycamores, smoke rose from Brittany's chimney, thin and steady, and the farm moved forward the way she always said it should, not fast, not loud, just durable, just